What are the risks of being a surrogate? Yeah, there are risks associated with anything dealing with medicine. Don't believe me? Do this. Go to your medicine cabinet, grab that bottle of aspirin, turn it around, look on the back at all that fine print. Part of that fine print on the back of your aspirin bottle discusses the risks associated with taking something as seemingly harmless as aspirin. Well, if aspirin comes with risk, then surrogacy definitely does. So diving into being a surrogate is not something that you should be doing without giving it considerable thought and research. Let's talk about it. What's up? I'm Corlandos Scott, a surrogacy attorney in Los Angeles, and that simply means that my practice revolves around helping people grow their families through assisted reproductive technologies like surrogacy. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about the medical risks for surrogates. We're going to look at the legal risks, and we'll talk about the ethical implications of those risks. Let's get to it. Now, generally, there are two types of risks in a surrogacy journey. There's medical risks and there's legal risks. But let's start with the medical risks. In a surrogacy arrangement, there's a woman who is carrying a child for another parent or set of parents. And with that comes all of the normal risks that are inherent to pregnancy. You don't get around the normal risk of pregnancy just because the baby you're carrying is not your own. The fact of life is that some women experience health problems during pregnancy. Now, these complications can involve the mother's health. In our case, it would be the carrier or the surrogate's health. And it could also be the fetus's health, or it could be both, the carrier's health and the fetus's health. And even women who were healthy before getting pregnant, it's possible that they can experience complications. Pregnancy symptoms and complications, they can range from mild and annoying discomforts to severe and sometimes even life-threatening illnesses. But the good news for surrogates is that typically women who qualify to be a surrogate are women who have mild and trouble-free pregnancies. However, let's be honest, no two pregnancies are exactly alike. So a smooth previous pregnancy doesn't guarantee that all future pregnancies will follow suit. For surrogates, most pregnancy complications are mild and they don't progress. However, when they do, they may harm the surrogate and or the baby. Here's a short list of some common pregnancy complications that surrogates subject themselves to the risk of. They're like this: high blood pressure, gestational diabetes, infections, preeclampsia, preterm labor, depression and anxiety even. There's pregnancy loss, miscarriage, stillbirth, and even other complications that are more common like, morning sickness and iron deficiency anemia. Now, in addition to the typical pregnancy risks, gestational carriers also go through the IVF process in order to get pregnant. So they also subject themselves to the risks that are associated with IVF treatments, treatments in general for IVF. Now, this can range from the risks that are inherent to the stimulating medications that she has to take in preparation for the embryo transfer, all the way up to the risks of the embryo transfer itself. Now, unfortunately, assisted reproductive technologies isn't a 100% guaranteed slam dunk for trying to have a baby. So there's also the risk of failure to conceive. And one of the often talked about risks of IVF in general, and especially assisted reproductive technologies, is multiple pregnancies. Now, that's a pregnancy consisting of more than one fetus. Twins, triplets, quadruplets. Please, no more than quadruplets for your own health's sake. No more than quadruplets. Nobody wants to be the next Octomom, really, right? There's also a risk that has come into the public eye more and more lately, unfortunately, and that's the risk of mishandled gametes. And what I mean by that is there's a risk that the medical facility, the embryology lab or the fertility clinic that you're working with, could mishandle the embryos. Now, there have been a few cases in the last few years where one person's embryos were transferred to another person. And so this other person had a baby that wasn't even theirs because there was a mix-up in the lab. So that's also a risk that you have to be aware of. And all of these things are possible, but they shouldn't scare you away from the process. They just should make you look into the professionals that you choose to work with so that you can feel comfortable that they're going to be giving you the highest level of service. Now, included as part of the medical risks is also the psychological risks of pregnancy and surrogacy. There's things like the risk of postpartum depression. There's also a lesser known risk, get this, of post-traumatic stress disorder during pregnancy. Yeah, there's actually cases of PTSD during pregnancy. Now, a surrogate has to handle all of the emotional repercussions of her existing family relationship while she's carrying someone else's baby. She doesn't just get to dump her family by the side, she's still dealing with those dynamics while she's working to help another family grow. So there's also the risk that the surrogate grows to have an unbreakable emotional attachment to the child she's carrying. Now, let me be honest. A lot of people come into the surrogacy process really worried about this, but honestly, I never have found it to be, in the last 10 years and hundreds of surrogacy cases I've worked through, I haven't found it to be a real heavy occurrence. It's really more common, if at all, in a traditional surrogacy arrangement where the surrogate is also the genetic mother of the child because her eggs were used to create the embryos. There's also legal risks involved in being a surrogate. Now, the biggest form of legal risk comes from the terms of the contract that a surrogate enters into. Now, the intended parents and the surrogate, they both have rights, they both have responsibilities, and that's what the contract is going to address. Now, these responsibilities on the surrogate's part can include a multitude of issues, ranging all over the place, from conditions under which an abortion or a reduction is going to be appropriate and allowed, all the way to addressing medical consent to undergo testing, and even all the way to having the surrogate's agreement to remain abstinent during certain phases of the surrogacy process. Now, the contract will also likely govern the surrogate's lifestyle choices also throughout the entire journey. I've seen parents request contract terms ranging from the super conservative things like requesting that the surrogate only eat organic during the pregnancy, all the way to the outlandish, like the surrogate agrees to only wear Egyptian cotton during the pregnancy. Yeah, I literally had a client ask for that. But no matter what the request is, if it makes it into the contract, this means that the surrogate is agreeing to abide by it. And why is that important? Because of the inevitable breach clause that every contract is going to have. The surrogacy contract will almost certainly address breach. Now, a breach is a fancy legal word that means you did something you weren't supposed to do, or you didn't do something that you were supposed to do, or that you guarantee people that you do. That's essentially a breach. So simply put, a breach is simply not living up to your promises in the contract, or not living up to your responsibilities in the contract. Well, if the surrogate breaches the contract in a way, then she puts herself at risk for liability and the consequences that come with the breach. And what might those consequences be? Well, maybe the surrogate forfeits any future compensation. Maybe she gets sued. Maybe she has to reimburse the parent for any financial loss. These are the legal risks to the surrogate. Now, on the opposite end of having an overbearing surrogacy contract is not having a proper surrogacy contract in place at all, or engaging in surrogacy in a place that doesn't allow surrogacy or even recognize surrogacy contracts. Now, this happened in Michigan, where not only are surrogacy contracts not recognized, but surrogacy is illegal, like at the felony level. The story goes like this. A Michigan surrogate agreed to carry a baby for a couple who was dealing with infertility. The surrogate gave birth to twins, but when it came time for the intended parents to be placed on the birth certificate, the state of Michigan said, nope, we don't recognize any surrogacy arrangements. Miss Surrogate, you delivered that baby, so you're the mother, and your name is going on the birth certificate. How you like them apples? It was so bad that the state's laws forced the parent couple to go through the process of adopting their own children. Imagine that. They had to adopt children that were biologically and genetically their children. And they had to go through all of the typical processes that are customary for adoption. They had to submit themselves to home visits from a social worker. They had to answer questions about their upbringing and their parenting style. They had to subject themselves to criminal background checks, and they even submitted reference letters testifying to their character. These parents even had to get temporary permission from this surrogate and her husband just to visit and see their own genetic children. And the entire time this adoption process is happening, the surrogate is technically the legal parent and is responsible for the child. So that's where the risk to the surrogate comes in. Now, I have never represented one surrogate who wanted that type of responsibility. So this is a risk that you simply cannot afford to overlook when you're deciding on embarking on a journey of being a surrogate. So here's another pro tip. Arizona also doesn't recognize surrogacy contracts. However, there are a number of surrogacy agencies that engage in matching Arizona surrogates in surrogacy journeys. So please, please, please proceed with caution if you live in Arizona and you want to be a surrogate, or if you want to work with a surrogate in Arizona. Before we cover the ethical risks, go ahead and just smash that like button. The one that has the thumbs up. It'll let YouTube know to share this video, and sometimes smashing things just relieves a bit of stress. So go ahead, try it out. Okay, I don't have a lot for you on the ethical risks of surrogacy, but I do want to mention a couple big ideas. Environment and abortion. Now, when I mention the environment, I'm talking about the environment that you are in while you're gestating or carrying someone else's baby. Raising your hand and volunteering to be a surrogate entails that you are willing to give up some things that you could normally freely do in order to serve as a surrogate. So the intended parents are sure to have a philosophy around what makes a healthy pregnancy, and it is incumbent upon you to respect that if you're saying that you voluntarily will be willing to carry their child for them. I remember representing a surrogate who enjoyed riding motorcycles. And when we were reviewing the surrogacy contract, she was bothered by the fact that the intended parents wanted her to refrain from motorcycle riding while she was pregnant. She was actually offended by that. Even though she recognized the safety risk that motorcycle riders face, she still didn't want to give that up. So it really came down to a harsh reality and an honest conversation that we had to have. No one was forcing her to stop riding motorcycles. She could choose not to be a surrogate and ride motorcycles all day long. But if she wanted to be a surrogate, then it would most surely come with the stipulation not to ride motorcycles while she was pregnant, for obvious reasons. So if you willfully choose to say yes to surrogacy, just know that you're by default saying no to some other things, but for a period of time. Now, the other ethical risk that I'll mention is the issue of abortion, termination, or reduction of pregnancy. This is one of the most important factors of a surrogacy arrangement and one of the most important terms of a surrogacy contract. Now, regardless of what your ethical position is on abortion or termination or reduction, the key here is to make sure that number one, you are absolutely clear on it. Number two, you match with a set of intended parents who share the exact same philosophy as you. And number three, make sure that the terms of the contract state precisely what you and the intended parents agree on. The last thing you want is for the issue of abortion to arise in the process and you and the parents are on two separate pages. That's when we start hearing about the surrogacy journey in the tabloids or the nightly news. If you need help sorting through the surrogacy process, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd love to chat with you. In fact, you can click the link in the description below and you'll be taken to chatwithcorlandos.com. And from there, you can start a chat with me. I look forward to chatting with you. See you in the next episode.